Coming up next on Arizona Horizon, we'll have the results of a new poll on Arizona's presidential preference election, and columnist E.J. Dionne talks about his new book on the history of American political conservatism. Those stories next on Arizona Horizon.
Arizona Horizon is made possible by contributions from the Friends of Arizona PBS, members of your PBS station. Thank you.
Good evening and welcome to Arizona Horizon. I'm Ted Simons. A new poll was released today by veteran pollster Bruce Merrill. The survey focuses on Arizona's presidential preference election, which takes place next Tuesday. Here now to crunch the numbers for us is the Merrill poll co-director, Tara Blanc. Good to see you again.
Good to see you too, Ted.
Good to have you here. Good to have another Bruce Merrill poll too.
Yes.
He does such a great job. You guys do a great job.
Thank you.
This is now basically presidential Republican, presidential Democrat, correct?
Exactly. We asked 300 Republicans and 300 Democrats who they were going to vote for in the primary election.
All right, and this is next to, let's take a look now. We'll start with Republicans because that seems to be making the most noise out there. And everyone's wondering, is Donald Trump as strong here as he is elsewhere? And look at that.
Donald Trump shook out with everybody else about the way he has fared in other states. He's getting a plurality of the votes, but he's not getting a majority of the votes. He's followed in second place by Ted Cruz, who really isn't outpacing his other competitors by statistical difference. And so best we can say is Trump is up by 31%, and the other three are in sort of a dead heat behind him.
But look at Mr. Undecided there. I mean, that's a lot.
That's a lot of undecided votes. And one of the things that's interesting will be to watch how those people split. When people are undecided, if they're really truly undecided, they may not go to the polls at all. If they do go to the polls, you can think that perhaps there will be some changes, there might be some shift, but on the other hand, what we see happen often is that it begins to divide the way that this decided has already come up,
Right.
come up. So, the undecided, it probably won't change things a lot unless something really major happens. I mean, we've got a week to go.
I know.
So,
something major
and in
always,
this campaign,
yes, it's always.
Who knows?
Who are these Trump supporters?
It's interesting. Across Arizona, his support cuts across all the population groups. We looked at everything that we normally measure on, and there really weren't any differences. And that's what we're finding across the country, too, is that people are asking the question, where is the support for Trump coming from? And nobody's really been able to answer that question. There's been some speculation. There's been some talk about Trump's ideology, the way he talks about other groups and subgroups of the population, the way he appeals to people in terms of saying things that perhaps people wish they could say and don't feel like they can. But there really is, nobody's really gotten at what it is that appeals to people about Trump. And I suspect that one of the reasons is that we're asking the wrong questions now, that things have changed so much about how people view candidates and how they feel about candidates, that we need to ask some different questions about why somebody is loyal to a particular candidate, particularly a candidate like Donald Trump, who appeals to people at the emotional level.
Well, what's the old saying? They may forget what you say, but they won't forget how you made them feel.
How you make them feel. And Drew Weston, who wrote a great book called The Political Mind, talks about the fact that emotion trumps reason every time.
Well, it's certainly trumping right now. I would imagine over 60 probably does very well, Trump?
Trump did a little better among the older voters, but it wasn't so glaringly evident that you would say, yes, that's where he does his best, or that's where he draws his support. He's drawing it across the board.
Let's look at the Democrats now, and Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders. Bernie Sanders is speaking right now down at the convention center. He's going to have to do a lot more speaking, apparently.
He is. In Arizona, Hillary Clinton's ahead of Bernie Sanders 2-1. And Hillary draws support from older voters, from more moderate voters, and she's much more popular, or finds more support among Hispanic voters than Bernie Sanders does.
What about the gender gap?
None. Believe it or not,
Really?
we didn't find a gender gap for Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders at all.
That's interesting, because you would think that Hillary Clinton would get the women vote maybe a little stronger.
I fully expected that there would be a gap between men and women in that election, and there wasn't.
Okay, so we've got the polls now. We've seen, it looks pretty much like it does around the country.
It does. It really has. There's nothing very different in Arizona that's going on that we haven't seen in other parts of the country, particularly in terms of the Republican race. But again, you have to understand that a poll takes the pulse at a particular point in time.
Yes.
We can't predict turnout. So it's anybody's guess who will actually go to the polls. If we get a lot more younger voters in the polls, it could be good for Bernie Sanders. If you get a lot more older people, Trump and Clinton are both going to gain from that. If you get people who are looking at what's happening with Trump and deciding that they don't want him to have the nomination, you may find that these people were more likely to go to the polls and vote for his opponent. So anything can happen.
And with this in mind, anything can happen as well as far as head-to-head matchups. Now, you and Bruce did
We've
some
started
more
looking at
questions?
some head-to-head matchups, and we're going to release another set of data on Thursday. But it's very interesting that the state is split right down the middle when you look at any head-to-head. At the federal level.
So are you suggesting, this is a little tease here, are you suggesting we got a horse race ahead of us?
I think we do.
Well, that'll be refreshing for a change.
It sure will.
Tara, it's good to have you here. Thank you so much. My best to Bruce. Thanks to both of you.
Thank you very much.
Washington Post political columnist and author E.J. Dionne Jr. is out with a new book on contemporary American political conservatism. The book is titled Why the Right Went Wrong: Conservatism from Goldwater to the Tea Party and Beyond. We welcome E.J. Dionne to Arizona Horizon. Good to have you here.
It's a joy to be here in the home of John McCain and Barry Goldwater. You can't get closer to my book than this.
I was going to say, now before we get too deep in the weeds here, define political conservatism.
You know, it's really good that you asked that question, because I think one of the problems I deal with in the book is, in a lot of ways, what should be conservatism has become a form of radicalism or a reaction. Because in my view, what political conservatism is about is being concerned about preserving a way of life which sometimes requires a certain amount of change. Edmund Burke was the great conservative, and he said the statesman should have a disposition to preserve and a desire to improve. And I think what often has happened to American conservatism is it's lost that desire to improve part. In my book, I sort of set up Dwight Eisenhower as actually a model conservative, and the kind of conservative that the current movement could really use. Many conservatives, of course, don't even think of Ike as conservative, but he was willing to accept certain changes from the New Deal. He thought there was a role for government. He did the interstate highway system, student loans that helped millions, including me, go to college. But he was also a budget balancer. He was sympathetic to religion. He obviously strengthened America in the world. And I think when Barry Goldwater, whom I respect usually as a human being, but his campaign in 1964 was a very radical campaign.
I want to stop you right there, because you write in the book that the Republican Party made what you call a wrong turn with Goldwater. Was that really the fork in the road?
It was, and in some ways, of course, Goldwater himself later in life kind of felt that himself. I have a story in the book that when Bob Dole needed Goldwater's endorsement in 1996 to show that he was a real conservative, Dole, bless his soul, could never stay on message. And so he said, "Barry, we're the liberals now, aren't we?" And Goldwater said, "Yeah, I guess we're the liberals." But in 1964, he was really radical. He really wanted to cut Social Security, the farm programs, a long list of things. And I think that with Goldwater, the moderates in the party, there was first a purge of the liberals and then a purge of the moderate politicians. And then over time, moderates, particularly in the Northeast and Middle West and on the West Coast, started leaving the party. The center of gravity shifted not so much to the Southwest, but to the Deep South. and that created a very different kind of Republican Party. And you're
he-
seeing it today with the Trump
Well, exactly.
rise.
And I want to get to him in a second here, too. But you're right that how every Republican leader, except for Reagan, every Republican president, whether it's George Herbert Walker Bush, George W. Bush, whether it's candidates running for office, they've all been branded turncoats, because it sounds like what you're saying is the far right has promised a lot. They've failed to deliver, though, once you get in office.
Well, the first sentence of the book is the history of contemporary American conservatism is a story of disappointment and betrayal. And I argue that conservative politicians since Goldwater have had to make a series of promises they couldn't keep to reduce the size of government, to roll back the cultural changes of the 60s, and of late to practically change the ethnic makeup of the country back to where it was in the 1940s. If you just take the size of government, government was the same size almost exactly as a share of the economy when Reagan left office as when he took office. But yet you have the base that's very angry, which explains why they vote for candidates like Trump. And candidates who try some version of moderation are pushed back. A good example, I talk a lot about John McCain winning the Republican nomination in 2008 against the wishes of the far right of the party. But when it came time to the convention, McCain really couldn't get his first choices for vice president because of the power of conservatives in the party. And it was only after he couldn't get either Joe Lieberman or the governor of Pennsylvania, Tom Ridge, that he turned to Sarah Palin. So the effort to change the party is very vexed because of the nature of the primary electorate.
Well, but I still think it's fascinating, this diagram to where I'm going to be far right, I'm going to promise you, I'm going to cut, not advance, not move. I get into office, I realize government is a huge beast and I can't deliver on those promises. And all of a sudden, after a while, the electorate that puts you in there, they get angry.
Right, exactly. And the problem is, there's a reason you can't cut government. It's because a lot of what government does, people want. I quote two great analysts of public opinion back in the 1960s who said Americans are ideological conservatives but operational liberals. Yes, they say they mistrust government, and we are rightly mistrustful. That's true of a lot of liberals too, of government, and yet we want government to do a whole lot of things. And best example of that are Tea Party people who say, oh, we want to cut, but please don't cut Social Security or Medicare. And they argue these are earned benefits, but what they're saying is these are better. This is a group that's older on the whole. They don't want to lose Social Security and Medicare. So these promises are just inherently unkeepable. And that's why I come back to a figure like Eisenhower, who did promise to balance the budget, and he was very fiscally restrained. But he understood that Americans wanted a certain amount of government, and that a certain amount of government could achieve conservative principles. What's more conservative than moving goods and people around the country on highways, or letting people improve themselves by going to college?
Compare the Tea Party to the John Birch Society.
Well, there's a member of the Tea Party one day who said, oh, they say we're radical, but they said that, or they say we're extreme, but they said that about the John Birch Society too. And in the book, my chapter on the Tea Party and some other developments, talk radio, the rise of Fox News, is called The New Old Right. Because in so many ways, the ideas that you heard from Tea Party folks are very similar to ideas you've been hearing from that part of the right for 50, in some ways, or 80 years going back to Roosevelt. And indeed, when you go back to somebody like Glenn Beck, many of the books that he put on his reading list were old John Birch Society books. And this was a very extreme group. It's a lot of moderate Republicans wanted Barry Goldwater to denounce them, and that's where his famous extremism in defense of liberty is no vice line came from.
But William Buckley basically put the stake in the heart of the John Birch Society, didn't he? I mean, he basically said, we can't work with these people.
Buckley always used to say that his job was to try to save the movement from the nuts, as he put it once. And so he did but it was not permanent in the sense that those ideas are still very much alive.
Is there a William Buckley ready to say the same thing about the Tea Party?
Well, in the book, I talk a lot about compassionate conservatives whom I have a lot of respect for, and what are now called reform conservatives. And what I argue is that there are some insights they have about the need for conservatism to correct itself But I personally think they've been too timid and too constrained by the nature of the party. I think a good example is Marco Rubio, who was very interested in the reform conservative ideas, but really didn't in any fundamental way break with the right. And I think his problem in this campaign has been that he tried to occupy too many parts of the party at once. So I think there are conservatives there struggling to make a change. And I think the crisis in the party you're seeing now may eventually hasten the day when conservatives say, you know, we can't go on like this. This doesn't work anymore. And I think you could see that as a product of the final result of this election in the end.
Let's talk about this election and Donald Trump. Do Republicans in general understand the Trump phenomenon? Because basically what you have is a party saying we've got to save the party from a guy that most people in the party are voting for.
Well, it's very important to note that Trump is getting fairly consistently about a third of the vote, somewhere between, say, 33 and 40%. So a majority of the party isn't with him. Up to now, the rest of the field has cut up the vote. So that's the first thing. And secondly, if you take Trump's support as a share of the whole country,
Sure.
It's a lot smaller. So I think it's important to keep Trump in context. But Trump, besides being the voice of that disappointment and a real hardliner, as we all know, on immigration, an issue very familiar here, is also speaking for a whole lot of blue-collar Republicans who have voted loyally for the party for years and have no material benefits to show for it. And I think that Trump, and you saw that in Michigan, a state that was really racked by economic change and trade deals. It's funny that you have a billionaire leading a class war inside the Republican Party. And so I think that's part of it. And then the other part of it is he says very explicitly what some conservatives were trying to say sort of under their breaths, or as somebody said, the dog whistle has become a bullhorn. You know, he doesn't just send signals, he says it outright, which I think is embarrassing to a lot of conservatives.
So, but with that in mind, again, I'm reading today, there's now going to be some big deal financiers are getting together maybe to try an independent run or a third party run or something to stop Trump. The mainstream of the Republican Party is still against. He may not have the most votes, have a majority.
He's won more delegates than anybody
They've
else.
got no one else has beaten him.
Right.
I mean, do they understand why?
Well, they ought to, because I do think that the sense of discontent in the country, the sense of economic hurt among many people inside the Republican Party is real. And then obviously this pushback against immigration and a sense that the country is changing in fundamental ways that especially older Americans are uncomfortable with. But I think until they can sort of have an effective answer on economics, they're going to have a problem to the blue-collar folks. You know, I look back on the last campaign, and in certain ways, both Rick Santorum and John Huntsman, two very different people, I think point to different strategies that have to come together for conservatives. You know, Santorum was that blue-collar candidate, and I think the Republicans need a much bigger sense for the left out than they have had, and Huntsman spoke for a certain kind of social moderation. In the long run, the party's problem is that young Americans, as well as Latinos and Asians and African Americans, don't want to have anything to do with them. And if your base is getting older and older, and I got nothing against older people myself, but they don't own the future. Young people own the future. And if the party stays on this path, they'll win some midterm elections because older people vote in midterm elections. But in the long run, old folks aren't the future, and they got to appeal to the young in a way they haven't.
Well, and that particular balance or division, I mean, it seems like it's holding. I mean, it seems like Democrats are winning the White House, but they're not winning Congress.
Right, and the problem. I mean, some of that is, of course, gerrymandering,
Sure.
which all parties do, but the Republicans happen to control the process in a lot of key states after 2010. But some of it is very low Democratic turnout in the midterms. And they're going to have to, there are about 45 million people who vote in presidential elections who don't vote in midterms. Wow. And Democrats got to figure out how to turn out their vote. But again, this is an older electorate that the good news for Republicans in the midterm is the bad news for the long run.
And something fascinating that you wrote was that the Republicans are taking a Marxist approach, which I thought was an interesting choice of words, in heightening tension. How long can that last?
Well, you've seen it in Washington ever since they took the Congress in 2010. And I think the theory has not worked for presidential elections, but it's worked well in Congress, which is block everything President Obama wants to do. Democrats are the party of government. And so when government fails, Democrats are more likely to take the blame than Republicans will. So you could argue it's a brilliant Machiavellian strategy. It just doesn't happen to leave us very well governed as a country.
We got about a minute left here. Why should conservatives, Republicans, either or, listen to you, a liberal, tell them how to save themselves?
It's an excellent question. And a conservative friend actually told me recently that sometimes people outside a movement or a friend who's not you can tell you about problems you have. And actually, National Review, the founding magazine in many ways of modern conservatism, gave the book a remarkably good review lately. They said all the ways in which I was wrong, but they said the central question I was asking conservatives have to ask themselves. The other reason I would ask conservatives to listen to me is I'm very explicit in the book that I think a democratic republic needs an effective an intelligent conservative movement, because we liberals aren't always right. We need to be challenged. There is a defense for tradition that conservatives want to mount. And so I come at this as an unapologetic liberal, but I like an effective conservatism because I think it would be good for democracy.
Well, it's a fascinating book. Interesting times, aren't they, EJ?
They sure are.
Yeah, good to have you here. Thanks for joining us.
Great to be with you. Thanks.
Wednesday on Arizona Horizon, the governor signs a bill that prohibits cities from banning plastic bags. That and more in our legislative update. And we'll hear about the Arizona Republic's new all-purpose real estate website. It's at 5:30 on the next Arizona Horizon. That is it for now. I'm Ted Simons. Thank you so much for joining us. You have a great evening.
Arizona Horizon is made possible by contributions from the Friends of Arizona PBS, members of your PBS station. Thank you.